Hello, everyone. It's your relationship strategist, Eric, and Dr. Sakeisha Hylick. And we're so excited to see you today. How is everybody doing? As you are coming in, make sure you type in what city and state you're watching from. And just make sure that you're interactive, because we thrive on interaction.
Yes, we do.
We love to flow. Now, I'm sure you may have been wondering what in the world provoked them to come up with this struggling to keep the vows webinars. You know, we found ourselves in predicaments just like some of you may be, wondering, did I make the right choice? Wondering, sometimes, you said I do, but you go through those moments where you just feel like,
I really shouldn't have done that, maybe.
And that's the truth. Just being realistic. Couples get there. Sometimes you might have been like us, going through those phases where, there's job instability or financial instability, the financial challenges up and down, and feeling like, you know what? It's more month than money.
Yes, more month than money.
Yeah. And then you got tempted to just throw in the towel, like, I can't do this anymore. And that in and of itself can become frustrating. So we wanted to take some of the principles from our Struggling to Keep the Vows book and help those couples that are struggling in those 5 key areas, because we're gonna be touching a little bit on every subject tonight. We're gonna be talking about communication. We're gonna be talking about finances. We're gonna talk about
sex.
Yeah, we're also gonna touch on faith and forgiveness, because those are all essential parts of a successful relationship. And it's really, really important that if you're struggling to keep your vows, especially in those areas, that we get some help.
Exactly.
And the good thing about it is you can do this from the privacy of your own home. So when we're talking to you, don't be afraid to raise your hand. There's nobody there but you and your boo. But, just a word to the wise, if it's something you're not really crazy about, you might not want to raise your hand too high. You might want to,
But what we do want to do is we want to thank you for taking the time out to invest into your marriage and your relationship, to take this Struggling to Keep the Vows master class. Now, with this, you also should have the Struggling to Keep the Vows workbook already sent to you. If you don't, then you need to just email us at marriagecanwin@gmail.com, or just send us a message in the chat.
Absolutely. So it's really, really important. We're going to be referring to the workbook throughout this class. So it's really, really helpful if you have it handy, okay?
Either the electronic version or the actual physical book.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I mean, I like to have things in my hand, but then I'm good with the electronic aspect too, right?
Exactly.
All
exactly.
Right. So let's get started. Woo, I hope you guys are excited. I hope you have your pen and your paper ready to take notes. But honestly, to have some applications that you can use and apply to your marriage if you're struggling to keep your vows, to help you #keep your vows. Get back on track. All right. So the first topic.
Communication.
Yes. Now, you know that communication is one of the cornerstones in having a successful relationship. And it's also one of the greatest areas in which couples struggle to keep their vows. Now, there are all different types of communication. There's verbal communication. There's nonverbal communication. Right. There's written communication. We get that. But we're going to talk about 4 key areas that if you're struggling to keep your vows, you may have been challenged with when it comes to communication, right, honey?
Exactly.
All right. So let's talk about it. The first challenge that you may be dealing with if you're struggling to keep your vows is talking at one another instead of to one another. Now, I'll be the first to raise my hand. I was one of those wives that could go from 0 to 100 really, really quick. And I had to learn to talk to my spouse instead of at him. And I'm sure you're wondering, Sakeisha, what do you mean by that? I mean, when I'm talking to him, I'm not just talking to hear myself talk.
Right.
I'm listening with the intention of communicating to him. I'm not talking to hear my own voice. Because one of those key challenges is that when you're not talking to your spouse, you're not including them in the communication part. You're talking at them kind of like you're scolding a child. Right.
And then remember that, communication is a two-way street. So in other words, not always talking, but, listening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of those cornerstones you want to make sure you hear us saying a lot of times when you're truly communicating with your spouse, you're not necessarily ready to react, but it's more so you can respond appropriately, respond with compassion. Because if not, like those of us who weren't always saved, you can go from 0 to 100 in a quick amount of time. And that's what we like to refer to as operating in high emotions, low what?
Intelligence.
Low intelligence. So it's really, really important that you take the time to talk to your spouse. You get to know them and understand how they communicate by talking to them. Remember when you first started dating, regardless of whether you dated for a small period of time or a long period of time, you went through that honeymoon phase. You just wanted to spend time with them. You just wanted to get to know them. But guess what? Marriage is like being in school continuously. It's a continuous learning process, because who you are in your relationship now is not who you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or maybe even a year or two ago.
This is true.
All right. So one of those key problems is if you find yourself talking at one another instead of to one another, that's one of those ways in which you can be struggling to keep your vows. So make sure that you're doing that.
Right. Now,
make sure you're not doing that.
Exactly, not doing that. But the next problem is that he's talking, she's talking, but nothing is changing.
Now, I know that's not happening to anybody listening to this, right?
Oh, man. So, here's the thing, and we love this acronym, ACT, Action Changes Thing. Because he could be talking, she can be talking, but if there's no changing, there's no action, then it's just a waste of energy. You can always be talking, and nobody's listening, nobody's comprehending, and there's no action plan or task to come from it, and it's just a waste of energy, a waste of time, and nothing's getting done.
And what you can find in that aspect, you can find yourself getting frustrated. And the fact is, when you take a moment and just learn to hit the pause button, if you really want some things to change, you got to sometimes learn how to push the pause button and practice doing that before you respond. Because if not, you're talking at him, he's talking at you, you're talking over one another.
Right.
So that's why there's nothing changing. If you really want to change, you have to be intentional about your responses. You have to be intentional about the way you're communicating with your spouse. But you also have to be intentional about listening to your spouse. Because if you want to change, you've got to understand what's going on and then make the necessary adjustment.
Right. So you have to be listening. And if no one is truly listening, then no one is really communicating. You're just talking to hear yourself talk, and there's no communication. Now, one way to ensure that you are listening is use what we call the repetition method. Mm-hmm. So that is, after you're saying something to your spouse, then your spouse will repeat what you actually said. And then if that is exactly what you said to your spouse, then you will verify, yes, baby, that is exactly what I said.
Absolutely.
But if it's not what you said, well, oh, sweetheart, no, what I meant was, and you give the explanation, and then you come back and say what?
Yes, you actually explain what I meant was X, Y, Z.
Right.
Now think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure everyone that's in this class, you're familiar with that two-step verification process.
Oh, yeah.
There's something on the screen, and you have to make sure that you put that correct information. You have to give it back what was given to you.
Exactly.
If not, it's not going to grant you access.
Right.
Now, the same thing, you're doing this verification process. He needs to be able to repeat back to me what I was telling him, so that way we make sure we're on the same page. Because if not, it's like, ooh, there's an issue.
There's a disconnect.
There's a disconnect. So just make sure that you write that part down, that you can use that repetition method. If you could put IE for those of you that are taking notes.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Which that's going to lead us to the third struggle when people are dealing with struggling to keep their vows, and they're dealing with communication challenges. If you've been following us for any period of time, I'm sure you've heard us talk about expressing what you expect. So a lot of times couples are finding themselves struggling to keep their vows because they're failing to express what you expect. Sure, I said the word failing. Failing means we're not meeting a standard, meaning we're not making sure that our spouse knows what we need. We tend to get, or what we've found is that dealing with couples, we get into a habit, we get on autopilot and expect, oh, I've been with him 5 years, I've been with her 10 years, I've been with them 15 years, they should know me by now. Granted, they will know you, but they still cannot read your mind. It's really important. Our kids have been in school for a long time, for years and years and years and years, and there's still some things we need to tell them because it's a constant learning process. People learn at different rates and different ways, so we need to make sure that we're constantly communicating with them.
Right.
We got to express what we expect because that's a huge one.
Exactly. That's a really huge one. So we need to make sure that we express how we want to be communicated to, how we want to be treated in our relationship, and also express, the needs and concerns that we have to each other's spouse. To your spouse. So if you don't tell them, hey, these are my needs, this is what I like, this is what I want, like you said, they won't know. And a key takeaway from this is that your spouse is not a mind reader. You have to express, you have to tell them, you have to effectively communicate to them what you expect in this relationship and how you expect to be treated and respected in this relationship.
Let's think of it like this. For those of you that are business owners or who may have worked in corporate America, when you first get there, there's kind of an expectation that's set.
Yes.
That, they expect you to show up on time. They expect you to, you have tasks. But the thing is that you've communicated those tasks. So that, therefore, you're held accountable. But if you have not communicated that, how can they, therefore, hold you accountable? The same thing with your spouse. How can you expect them to meet a need that you have not expressed to them?
You can't because you didn't tell them. You're thinking that they already know what you want, how you want it, how you want to be treated, and you never told them.
Correct. You teach people how to treat you, and in order to teach them, you have to communicate it, and not by rolling our eyes, not by just giving them a side eye. Tell them, honey, this makes me feel what my expectation is X, Y, Z. Now, your spouse or significant others. You know which words to use. You know which words are hot buttons. So we're not going to belabor that point. But just use wisdom when you're communicating with your spouse. In the heat of the moment when you're both angry, that's not a time to say, to run down the list of everything that they're not doing. But to let him or her know, going forward, I'd appreciate it if, when I'm talking, you let me finish. I want to hear what you have to say, but I also want to be able to finish expressing my feelings. Okay, so now they know that. Now, nobody's perfect. They might mess it up a couple more times, but at least acknowledge that, hey, honey,
True.
I noticed you're getting better. You only interrupted me 2 times instead of 5 times. And
Right.
we're saying that we're laughing, but you have to be mindful of their little things and strategies that you can implement into your relationship on a regular basis that can bring about a change. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. Makes
All
sense.
right. So what's our fourth problem?
So our fourth problem is your actions do not line up with your words. Last, when your actions do not line up with your words, your marriage can suffer greatly. When you say that you're going to do something, make sure that you follow through. Your spouse needs to be able to rely on your words.
Now, what happens when you don't do that? When you don't follow through on things you promise, that causes a breakdown in trust.
Yes.
If you say you're going to pay a bill, if you say you're going to put down the toilet seat, if you say you're going to show up at a certain time and you don't, then your significant other begins to, I'd say, distrust. I hate to say distrust, but they don't believe you when you say you're going to do something. So that's why your actions need to line up with your words. And it also goes back into something as simple as your body language. Your actions just got to line up. If you're telling your spouse you've forgiven them for something, or if you're telling them it's okay, but you're rolling your eyes and turning your back and stonewalling them,
Yeah.
your actions
Yes.
are not lining up with your words, because if they take you at your word and you're saying you're okay, but your body response is saying otherwise, how are they to know which one to believe? Now, from a woman's perspective, yes, we can assume, well, I did like this, but he's like, look, she said she's okay, and he rolls with it, and now you're upset, and there's frustration and division in the relationship, which could have been handled by simply, no, I'm not okay.
Right.
Yes, you did offend me. Yes, I am upset. We've got all these extensive vocabulary. Why not use it?
Right. And we don't want to break down that trust, because then your words lose value. It's almost like crying wolf. The little boy that kept crying wolf, and there was no wolf. After a while, people are not going to believe in your words. So when you lose credibility in what your words are saying, then no one's going to believe you. You lose trust, and that's not good for your relationship.
And I'm sure if you've heard any of this before, if you've experienced it, just put "that's me" in the chat box. Just put "that's me." But what we have to wrap up this section on communication is just 5 tips that can help a couple that may be struggling to keep their vows.
Oh, yes.
It may help in the communication aspect.
And number 1,
What's number 1?
pray on it first. Instead of just making assumptions and just reactive to judgment calls, pray. Pray on it, and pray on it together.
Now, you know what? A lot of people might say, oh, I've heard this, boy. You talking about pray everything. Now, you know what? The Bible tells you that you need to, you got to have faith, but faith without works is dead. We're telling you to pray on it, but then take some action, because of what we talked about before. We don't want you operating in high emotions, low intelligence. So when you take time to pray, you can take your time to calm your mind, calm your emotions, but so you can respond instead of reacting.
This is true.
Because when you respond, it's, you've had time to think about it. When you react, it's high emotions, low intelligence, and it blows things out of proportion, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. Number 2.
All right, so just make sure you aim to understand your spouse's point of view. I mean, even if they're not particularly good about sharing it with you, you got to learn to listen, so it'll help you to understand their emotions and their needs. Well, we tend to go into things thinking of only our perspective, but you're not in a relationship with yourself. You're in a relationship with your spouse.
Right.
So just like you take their feelings into consideration, they want you to take their feelings into consideration.
Right. So number 3, above all, remain calm.
And I know this may be hard for some of us who may have struggled. I have a feeling I'm going to be raising my hand all night. But so for those of us that may have struggled with, anger and emotion, then a lot of times people may see us and be like, oh, you guys are cool. I wasn't always at this point. I struggled with my emotions. I struggled with anger. But what I had to learn is that when I reacted out of my emotions, that I wasn't getting a better response.
Right.
I was making things worse. And the same thing for him. Because when you're calm, you want to keep the situation from escalating and spiraling out of control. Because once you lose that control, you start to say things, and words hurt, and it's more difficult to repair those words once they come out. Because you can say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
Right.
But the damage has been built. Your spouse, they start to build that wall to protect themselves from getting hurt. But sometimes we don't realize that wall that we use as a hedge of protection also becomes a line of division in the relationship.
It does.
And you're going to have to work that much harder to break down that wall instead of just trying to be mindful to help prevent it from building up in the first place.
So if you feel that you're starting to get heated in a discussion, and that's where you start finding yourself in high emotion and low intelligence, and you start getting to the point where you have very high emotion and no intelligence, you got to step back, take a pause, call time out, have your safe word.
Yeah, that's one of the tips that we tell our couples if you're struggling to keep your vows. Both of you come up with a safe word, something that means that once we call that word, that's it. All communication ceases. Go to your corners. Calm down. You guys can set a 30-minute timer you guys can agree upon a mutual time. Now, not 2 or 3 days, 2 or 3 weeks,
Right.
but you guys have got to diffuse this situation.
Right. So, and 5,
Yeah.
our final tip for today, make sure you're spending quality time with each other on a regular basis and use this time to talk and listen, not just sweep things under the rug.
And not just swap daily updates, meaning the kids are here, this bill is paid. Take time to intentionally communicate. So for those of you, we have your workbooks in front of you. There is a quiz on communication. There should be about, I'd say, 10 questions
Yes.
on there that you can take at your leisure to help you make sure that you've internalized the information. And if there are any questions on there on the quiz that you are not sure about, you want us to go in further detail, elaborate, you can put, communications quiz, question number, whatever, or you can send us an email and then we can respond a little more in depth with you that way, because we want to make sure that these key points are being driven home.
And this is on page 9 and 10, and you have 10 questions and they're multiple choice.
Yeah. And this is not to be anything tricky, but to be mindful, we all process things differently. So we have to make sure that, we're communicating things effectively.
So now we're going to move on to our next section, which is finance.
Wow. Now, you know what? Finances, that's one of the biggest challenges in relationships. A lot of times when we talk to couples, it seems like it's more month than money. That before my paycheck hits the bank, everything is spent. But dealing with money in and of itself can be a struggle or a challenge in many relationships. And once you get married, it's no longer just your finances, it's our finances. Now, I'm not going to get into the debate whether you should have joint accounts, separate accounts. You guys have got to decide what's going to work for you.
Correct.
We have joint accounts that take care of all of our bills, and then we have like these little miniature separate accounts. So to allocate a little bit of play money if there's something else that we want. But we have to make sure all the bills in the household's taken care of. And you want to make sure that your finances are not getting out of control, because when your finances are out of control, there are pretty much about 4 major issues that can cause this, and that's why some couples are struggling in there to keep their vows when it comes to finances.
And the number 1 issue is a lack of discipline. First, there's a lack of discipline, and when there's a lack of discipline, then everybody has, or both of you have, a tendency to overspend and not watch where your money is going.
Wow. You know what? One of the things, and you guys may have heard Dave Ramsey saying that you should be telling your money where to go instead of it telling you where to go. I'm sure you guys have heard that, them say there's more money, more problems, but it's not true. It's not necessarily how much you make, it's how much you keep. Be mindful of what you're going to do with your finances, meaning you have got to have that money conversation, and your wedding day is not the day to do it. Have these conversations in advance, because you want to make sure that you're on the same page in regards to spending. Who's the spender? Who's the saver? How are you going to allocate your funds? And make sure you have a plan in place. And I know I'm going to get ahead of myself, but I'm going to let you take it from here, honey.
Yes. So the number 2 issue is a lack of preparation, because unexpected loss of income.
That can occur.
And that is really.
I'm sure we're not the only one. I'm back to raising my hand again. I'm sure we're not the only ones that have experienced that.
Yes. So we have to prepare for emergencies. We got to get a plan. We got to make sure that we have multiple streams of income. We have a savings account that we have at least 6 to 8, or nowadays really 6 to 9 months of bill money that will take care of your major expenses like your house, food, and transportation. So you have that savings there for that one time that God forbid that there is an unexpected loss of income.
And sometimes couples, when they're getting married, they're not thinking about it. I'll use us for an example. We got married. I was a pharmacist. He was an engineer. So finances, that was not necessarily an issue. But the fact is that we didn't plan for there to be layoffs
Right.
at the job, for the company to be sold, and for them to start eliminating certain positions. So then you find yourselves living paycheck to paycheck. And when you're living paycheck to paycheck, any unexpected expense that you're not prepared for, a medical bill that pops up, a flat tire, something going on, your
Right.
child needs something, that can throw you into the red really, really quickly. And that can cause things to develop in your relationship. You can have anger, you can have resentment, guilt, all kinds of things can start to come into your relationship when when you're avoiding that money question and when you're not planning for unexpected loss of income.
Also, what you don't want to do is issue number 3, avoiding the B word.
Oh my goodness.
The B word is budget.
Yes, yes.
Because marriages start with 2 people, and those 2 people have to come together and they got to start talking and communicating about their finances. You got to set a budget. You got to make sure that your income is not less than your outcome. You want to have more income than your outcome. That's when you definitely need to initiate the B word.
Yeah. A budget can be hard, and for many people, you might have been thinking, hey, well, when I was single, I did what I want. I spent what I want. I lived how I wanted. But when the two of you come together as one, then you have to not only think about yourself, you have to think about them as well. So you need to find out what kind of debt each one of you are bringing into the relationship, because the 2 of you together, it not only impacts you, but it impacts
your spouse.
And that's really, really important. And one thing that you hear about now, things have shifted. We are doing some amazing things, as women. And you'll find yourselves, or we've been finding in lots of relationships, the woman could be making more money.
And that's the issue number 4.
Yeah.
Difficulty handling when the woman makes more money.
And you know what? In today's society, it really shouldn't be an issue, but in many households, it is an issue.
Exactly. It's the mindset.
Yeah, the husband can struggle with this, and even the wife, because it might feel like there's a competition when you got to be mindful of that you guys should not be competing against one another. You should be complementing one another. Now, we know it's natural for the men to want to be providers for the household, but that does not mean if he doesn't make more that he's any less of a person.
Right, because you got to look at it like this. That you're both on the same team. Both of your incomes go into the same account, or you combine them. So if one person makes $50,000, the other one makes $90,000, you put them together, that's $140,000 of spending power, of saving power, of buying power. Investing power.
Yeah.
So that is where you have to look at things, not a competition, not individuals trying to say, an ego or anything. You got to look at it as this is a team. Teamwork makes the
dream work.
Right. So now we're going to give you a couple tips so you won't have to struggle into your finances. And the number 1 tip is
just make sure you start working with a financial advisor right away. It's really, really important that you get professional advice. Some people feel, I can do this on my own. But sometimes when you get that third party in there and they don't have a vested interest, meaning they're not trying to pick her side over his side. They're a neutral third party, and their goal is to help you guys get your finances in order. That's something to take advantage of so they can help you plan for your future.
Now, also, do note that Sakeisha and I are both licensed financial services advisors, and we're licensed in 9 states, and we have a team of other financial advisors. We do help couples and individuals to build and protect wealth, to talk about building educational funds for their children. So we can even say $1 million baby. So by the time they turn 60, they have over $1 million of cash. And then also you want to talk about your retirement. You want to talk about living benefits. You want to talk about protecting your spouse in case something happens to you. So these are the things that a financial advisor will be able to give you some wisdom and give you a starting point to plan for your life financially.
Now, so that leads me kind of to our second point, just making sure you're being proactive and taking control of your finances by establishing a budget, because you don't want to wait for the unexpected to happen.
Right.
You don't want a loss of a job. You don't want to. Some couples, it happens. Pregnancy happens, and you weren't necessarily planning for it. But then once you have the baby, how are you going to provide for the baby? What about college? What if there's an unexpected loss in income? There's so many things that you have to be mindful of. So just make sure that you're being proactive instead of being reactive.
Don't wait till the emergencies happen.
Yeah.
So number 3, remain flexible and open to compromise so that both partners feel heard and have had a say in marital finances. Not on one side. Although one may be a little stronger and their strength is in finances and the other ones may not, you still want to be able to hear from both sides, hear the concerns, and then make sure you take each other's consideration. So that's part of the express what you expect.
Now, you know what a couple can also do? You can try this on for size. If you have a way that you like to handle the finances and your spouse has a way they like to handle their finances, try this. You guys agree to follow one spouse's plan for at least 6 months. See how well you're doing.
Right.
If it's not working out the way you planned, now you got to be open to it.
That's right.
Be flexible, willing to compromise. But if not, then you try the other spouse's way for 6 months and see what works best for your family. Therefore, both of you guys are active participants in the planning process, and there's less likely to be anger and resentment when it comes to the finances because you both are contributing.
Right, exactly. Now, number 4, also consider investing. And this is how you're going to work together to reduce debt. And that means your credit card debt, all kinds of debt, whether credit card, mortgages, car payments, student loans, you name it.
Student loans. You said the S word.
Yes. So now we're coming up on our financial quiz. And again, this is the next step right after you, if you look into the book, and there's 10 questions. Look into your workbook, whether it's digital or the physical workbook. Let's see, this one's on the financial quiz is actually on page, let's see. It's actually on page 17 and 18.
Yeah. So
10 questions.
You can take a few seconds, go through those quizzes, circle what you feel is correct. Let us know if you have any questions. Put some notes in the chat box. Now, if you're anything like me, just take a second and stand up, stretch your arms, because we're getting ready to go into this third section. And we need you guys to be nice and loose and ready and relaxed to be talking about the next section.
Yes, because the next section we're going to talk about is sex.
Yeah.
Sex
I'm
is...
sure we got everybody's attention. Are we looking? Yeah, I think we got everybody's attention. At least we got the men's attention,
Of
right?
course, yeah.
I know some of the ladies.
You see I'm sitting up, right?
Now, what? We say this to be funny, but you know what? Sex is really a huge part of marriages. And the fact is that couples need to connect on a regular basis. It's got to be more than sex. There's got to be intimacy as well. Intimacy and sex are two totally different things. But there are some areas when it pertains to sex in the relationship where there's frustration, and that's where couples are struggling to keep their vows.
Right.
And one of those key frustrations is that they have unmet expectations.
Yes,
so
because
that is number one. And I'm sure you're like, what do you mean unmet expectations? You may be expecting a certain thing from your partner, but your partner is unable to fulfill those expectations, and then you become disappointed, and then you become frustrated. And this happens typically when one spouse is more experienced than the other. Sometimes we're not taking into account, the workload for your spouse. Mm-hmm. One spouse may be tired. They may have a job that causes them to stand on their feet all day. But the fact still remains, if there's an expectation that's not being met, Communicate it. Go back to chapter 1, the first section. You got to communicate it. What are your thoughts, honey?
Oh, yes. When you have sexual frustrations on the high, your marriage will unravel quick.
Yeah.
And, you want to be able to meet your spouse's needs. And you need to also find out about, their love languages, how to meet them, their needs, their wants, how much, when, how, and how much, and how many.
Wow. I think I heard how much, how many times?
How much?
But the thing is that sex is it's a huge part of the relationship. And it's usually a huge priority to the men, but nowadays with everything transitioning, it's really huge for women as well. Not to say it was not huge before, but women are going to have physical needs as
yes,
well.
They will.
But
yeah.
What we want to make sure that our husbands understand is that sex begins way before you get into the bedroom.
Right.
Let me say that again. Sex begins way before we get to the bedroom.
Right.
Let me take a sip on that one.
So this leads to the next frustration, number 2, allowing external influences in your bedrooms. This is when you have, Susie, who can't keep a boyfriend, never been married, is trying to tell you, child, that's what you don't be worrying about. She's giving you all these advice about sex and what you should and should not do, but she doesn't have one herself.
Let me look at it like this. You make sure whoever's speaking into your life and over your marriage, that they're qualified to do so. So if you are in a married relationship and you are having challenges, go into your best friend that's single or your cousin that's been married 3 times.
Right.
Or, that may not be the best person to ask for a question, and not go into mama and daddy. Establish those boundaries because, the husband and wife, they come together and they cleave together, become one flesh. But every time we keep running back to mommy and daddy, it's like we're tearing a part of that relationship out. I would suggest definitely if you're having a challenge, specifically in the bedroom, that you reach out to a coach or for a counselor to find out what are those underlying causes that are resulting in that area.
Right. Now, this next issue or this next frustration is very popular. I mean, it's everywhere. It's public, private, you name it. It's pornography. Yeah. It is very addictive. Now, pornography is everywhere. I mean, gee whiz, the television, there's sex on television, there's sex scenes. I mean, everything is sexy.
Internet,
but
social media, Instagram, Facebook.
Yes. But pornography, what it does, it gives you unrealistic expectations about sex. Because they take 2 or 3 or 4 different takes just to shoot one scene. When you're like, wait a minute, that ain't what I saw. You ain't doing what I saw in this porn.
But what it does, it places unrealistic expectations
exactly.
on your partner. You expect them to look and behave and act like someone in this porno movie, which causes frustration, anger, resentment.
Yes.
Because, sometimes when you get to that point where you rely on pornography to stimulate you, it makes your spouse, how are they going to be able to meet a need? How is there going to be pleasure?
Unrealistic expectations.
If you're depending on that, which kind of what leads to our next point, which causes you to, or which may cause a spouse to respond in lack of sex as a punishment.
Right, withholding sex.
You're putting all this frustration on them. And what it does, it leads to even more anger and resentment. It pushes your partner away. But what it does, it opens up the door for the enemy to try to come in, to make you feel like, oh, well, your spouse isn't meeting your needs. Then here comes this someone else that wants to start speaking your spouse's love language and listening to them and complimenting them and then suggesting things to them. And I'm sure if you're a wife and you're listening, you're like, well, he shouldn't be entertaining that anyway. You're absolutely right. He should be walking away. But there are people that are still going to try to, hey, well, you look good today, And he's like, gee, thanks. Well, but if you're not getting that at home, like, oh, wow, I do look good.
The lack of sex leads to barriers to a fulfilling sex life, which, hey, it leads to something, that big misconception that the grass is greener on the other side because you're not getting it at home. You're starting to look outside. You're like,
Well, you know what? If your grass looks green on the other side, maybe you need to water your own yard.
this is true. This is true.
And we're saying that as a joke, but I mean, it's serious. Sometimes things do look, like it's so much easier. But when you find out everyone is coming into relationships with their own degree of baggage.
Right.
When you sever one relationship, you jump into another relationship. It's not like that person's going to be without baggage. And you still have not resolved your old challenges. So guess what? You then bring that into a new relationship.
Yes.
So, what it does is pretty much complicate things even more.
Right. Now, lastly, the biggest issue is the bottom of the to-do list. Your spouse becomes last on your list. Everything else becomes more priority than your spouse. Sex should not be the last, and sex with your spouse should not be the last on your to-do list.
Okay. I'm like, making sure you included sex with your spouse. Wait a minute.
Well, the needs of everybody else comes before them, like your children, your parents, your business, your job, church, all these things come. Your spouse is like, hey, baby, we had a date night. We were going to go out. We were going to go have a staycation or something. And you keep putting it off, or, your spouse starts to make advances towards you, flirting with you, and you don't respond.
But you know what this happens? It basically can make someone feel like you're being dishonest or you're cheating on them with someone else, meaning when you're constantly putting your children first, you're constantly putting your job first, and any work activities, you're making them a greater priority over your spouse. So it makes you feel as if they are being unfaithful to them. So you just want to make sure that you want to avoid falling into these types of situations. Make sure that you keep the lines of communication open, and then just make sure you're clearly communicating your needs and your expectations to your partner. And make sure you not only communicate, but you listen. And listen is a part of the communication process, because it's a two-way street. Exactly. I talk, you listen. So when you talk, I listen. And that's what because we got to be mindful. Sometimes we feel communication is just, no, it's a two-way street. Some of us can be like that with God. We just talking, and then say God's not talking to us. No, you weren't listening. True.
Now let's pause and take a maintenance check. We have a sex quiz, and this is on page 25 of the workbook. Go through this quiz and find out, do I fit in this category?
And it's really, really important. Just take a few seconds and answer the questions, because that way, if there's something that you're not sure about, again, you can put the notes in the chat box, or if it's a really personal question, you can send us an email or a DM, and then that way we could see if we could try to address it by the end of the class.
Right. Now, our next topic is forgiveness.
Ooh, yes. That's something that a lot of people struggle with in relationships. We have to be mindful that neither one of us are perfect. There are things that we may say or do that may hurt or offend our partner, either intentionally or unintentionally, but we've got to be willing to walk through the forgiveness process. And why do I say that? Because forgiveness is not necessarily for them, it's for you. Right. Because a lot of people may not recognize this. When you harbor unforgiveness, it can manifest itself in your body physically. We wonder about the blood pressure, cancer, and all of this stuff. Some of it's from harboring unforgiveness.
This is true.
The anxiety, depression. Some of these things we're harboring unforgiveness. It impacts you spiritually. You're praying. Didn't they say that you need to go back and forgive your brother, then bring your gifts to the altar? That's right. So you need to make sure that you are walking in forgiveness. Does it mean you become a doormat for everybody? Absolutely not. But what it does mean is if you're harboring unforgiveness, you are allowing your heart to become hardened. And it's impacting you as well. Because some people can hurt and offend you and keep going on about their life. And I'm not saying your spouse will do that. But sometimes men and women are differently. They think differently. So he may say something that hurts and offends me, and I'm harboring unforgiveness towards him, and he's going on about his day because he's had no earthly idea that he's hurt or offended me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm angry. I'm starting to have all kinds of symptoms in my body from harboring unforgiveness versus just, being intentional and be ready to do the work and walk through the forgiveness process.
Right. Now, there's 4 big barriers that keep you from moving on that path to have forgiveness. Barrier number 1 is failure to recognize the process.
Now, that's one of the things that I was talking about before, the fact that forgiveness is a process. And it's not something that happens overnight. Now, we are realistic, people. We know that not everything happens overnight.
Right.
It can take time for the wound to heal. It can take there are going to be moments where you struggle internally and like, oh my gosh, you can have those triggers that replay over in your mind over and over again, the hurt or the act or the words that were said. But be mindful, be realistic, understand that it's a process. It's going to take time, but you've got to be intentional about it. And just a word of caution, I'm speaking to the wives as a wife. Every time if we walk in forgiveness to our husband, if he forgot to bring something from the store, that is not an automatic. Next time you go to the store, don't forget to bring back such and such like you did last time. You don't keep bringing it up over and over and over again.
Right. All right, let's move to barrier number 2, failure to resist negative thoughts. This is the second barrier, and it's the failure to resist negative thoughts. They keep coming back, like you were just saying.
Yeah, those negative thoughts. What we have to realize, those are triggers. Something, a word or something, you see something, and it reminds you of that hurt and that pain. But you have to realize that when you're intentional about walking through the forgiveness process, you're releasing them from the choice or the behavior. You're releasing yourself from these negative thoughts associated with it, because it leads to frustration, leads to anger, leads to resentment. And you know what? It's not even going to change what has happened. But you have to learn to deal with what's going on. You got to deal with forgiveness in the first place. And forgiveness, it can be a challenge process, because for some people, there's some things that you can forgive and move on quickly. But there's certain things we do recognize that take a little bit longer. They hurt. Especially those words. Words hurt.
They do. They
can cut deeper than the sword. I can forgive. Like if a baby, you stub your toe, it hurts and it stings for a little bit, and then you move on with life.
Yeah.
But I swear, somebody slices that leg, you're like, oh my God, it takes a while, because it's like the wound is just there and it's burning and it's constantly hurting. And even if you look at it, it seems to hurt more.
Right.
But you got to be intentional about walking through that process.
All right. So barrier number 3, failure to realize the 3 types of manifestations.
Wow. Now, this is a lot. There are 3 different types of manifestations when you don't walk in forgiveness. And we talked a little bit about it early. We talked about the fact that forgiveness and how it can manifest on the inside of you. And then when you're constantly holding on to those negative thoughts, those negative emotions, you can see them manifesting in yourself emotionally, physically, and mentally. That's a challenging thing. You see people suffering with these diseases, and they're tied to that root of unforgiveness. You can be dealing with some serious mental battles.
And the physical comes out in stuff like cancer and other illnesses, high blood pressure, like I think we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, some people feel that, I'm strong, I'm tough, I can walk through this process. You know what? You're wondering why you're having high levels of anxiety, high levels of stress. Sometimes that's all tied
Can't sleep at night.
Forgiveness, because you're trying to make it seem like you're indispensable.
Right.
We are all human beings. We all have emotions. We get that part. But walking through this process is essential.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and barrier number 4, no plan of action.
Wow. What was that saying? Those who fail to plan to fail. We know that anytime you're dealing with others, be it a spouse, a boss, a child, they can say some things or do some things that can hurt or offend you. And it may take some time to repair the damage, especially if one person isn't as willing as the other.
Right.
But we want you to be mindful with the right amount of work, the right amount of commitment and dedication,
Yes.
that you and your spouse can walk through the forgiveness process together, but you both have to be willing participants. And what you will see as a result of that, both of you guys are growing, you're evolving, but you got to be mindful that it will take time. You got to be mindful you have to release those negative thoughts and emotions, because if not, it can negatively impact you physically, spiritually, emotionally.
Yes, it does. All right, so turn to page 33 and take the forgiveness quiz.
And make sure that you comment in the chat box if there's a comment on the quiz or something that you have a question or concern about, or definitely send us a DM if it's something you want to talk about a little more in depth. I sure hope that this has been helping somebody. If it has been, put a 1 in the chat box. If it hasn't, don't say anything. No, I'm just kidding.
All right.
I'm joking.
So we got the forgiveness process, but we also have to rebuild trust. Rebuilding trust, once it's been broken, can be really, really challenging. Trust in a marriage can be broken in many ways, But what's most important is that the couple focus on rebuilding it and rebuilding it in a healthy way. One that's going to be sustaining and not just a quick, something that's just easily, they do the word but never do the action. It just give you lip service.
Now just be mindful, once trust has been broken in a relationship, it has to be earned again. It's just not something that's automatically given.
Right.
So I want to make sure that the couples out there, that as you're listening, that you are mindful that broken trust takes time to repair.
Right.
Just think about it. You love your child, but your child lies to you. You'll be like, you're mad. You will forgive them, but sometimes it takes time for you to trust what they're saying again.
Their words lose value.
Absolutely. Their words lose value and credibility with you.
Right, credibility.
So we got to make sure that we're being mindful that we choose our words wisely.
All right, so let's talk about some of the key factors that are in rebuilding trust.
Yeah.
And number one is we have to deal with the unresolved issues.
Oh, my goodness. One of the things when you're coming into a marriage or a relationship, you're bringing baggage.
Right.
Past hurts, past pains. That's why it's so important. And we tell our singles, we use that acronym, GET CLEAR, before you go into a relationship. And then when you're getting clear, and I'll tell you what CLEAR spells, you get clarity on what you're looking for, that you love yourself, make sure you express what you expect. The A, you allow yourself to heal from past hurts and baggage. And R, you resist the need or the urge to compromise just to have somebody. So we tell you to get clear. And the same thing, when you have unresolved issues, you have to make sure that you deal with that past hurt and that past baggage. Just a word to the wise, counseling, coaching, it's not taboo. You want to have a healthy marriage, a healthy relationship. So you've got to be do the work to deal with those unresolved issues, so you don't take that into the relationship and hurt someone else.
Right. So key factor number 2 is inability to identify triggers.
Yeah, that's the way that impacts your relationship, because you don't know why. Every time you see a bald man in a red shirt, you just get angry. And that could be tied to something that happened to you years ago. And case in point, I'll share my story with my husband. We've been together for a long time. And I love to have everything clean and neat, right? So right after I would make up the bed, he would go and jump in the bed. And I would be so angry. I mean, literally livid. Like,
It looks good. It
him,
looks comfortable.
I know. I've been wanting to tell him to get out of the house, y'all. It was really that serious to me. But he asked me a question. He said, "What? Who did something to you? Who hurt you or said something? Are you seriously that angry over a bed? You make it look all nice and inviting and then get mad when I get in the bed. What is going on?" And I had to sit back and think about the fact. And I realized why I got so angry when he got in the bed. He messed up the bed, and it reminded me of my childhood. When my dad, he was a retired warden for Rikers Island, but he was also in the Army. So part of their training, they used to have to make up those beds so tight you could bounce a quarter off of that. That was part of his training. And if we were to mess up the bed, he'd get angry and withhold love. And that was the thing that frightened me and hurt me. The fact that he could go from, a loving dad to, he could be kind of cold and callous if you messed up the bed. And he would withhold love. It's almost like you weren't even there. You were non-existent. Yeah. And I hated the way that made me feel. So when my husband would mess up the bed, I didn't realize that was triggering me.
That's right. That's triggers.
Like, oh my gosh, he's going to withhold love. You know what I mean? And not really understanding the connection between the two. So for those of you that are watching the video, you may be thinking it's not messing up a bed. It could be, when he uses certain words or phrases or certain facial expressions. Start to recognize your triggers. What is it that causes you to respond? And then figure out what it is and how you can deal with it.
Right.
I had to be intentional about understanding, okay, he's getting in the bed because I've made it look inviting for him. It
That's
has
right.
nothing to do with, he's not going to withhold love from me because it's messed up. And I had to learn to separate the two, recognizing one was a trigger, but this was something totally different.
Yes.
If that makes sense. And I know I've said a mouthful, but there are some things that you just got to sit there and think about. So, I'm sure you're like, how does this apply to me? Start thinking about those triggers. What things make you angry for no reason? Leaving up the toilet seat or putting your clothes next to the hamper instead of in the hamper. I mean, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I'm just saying.
All right. So let's go to our key factor number 3. And this is a must. You have to have a plan of action.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about putting maybe a 5-step process into place to help building this rebuilding your trust. Yes. So number 1, you got to be committed to forgive and or to be forgiven.
Yeah, because you've got to be committed to doing that. You can't just halfway, I forgive you, no I don't.
Right.
You forgive him about this today.
Either you're in or you're not.
You're angry. It's like you're playing hopscotch.
Yeah.
You're not exactly sure what's acceptable and what's not. So you got to commit to being forgiven or to forgive. You can't be, how they say,
no half
hot
stepping.
or cold.
Right. No lukewarm.
Right.
No lukewarm. Step number 2, you got to be open and you got to be willing to do the necessary work.
You've heard us use the acronym before, ACT, action changes things. So you've got to think that you are going to have to do the work. You understand trust has been broken and needs to be rebuilt. Okay, what do I need to do to re-earn your trust?
It's going to take work.
And realize it's going to take work, but you got to be
and
open
time
to it. Because it's not going to automatically happen.
Right.
You can't just say, get over it and keep going. It's not going to work like that.
Right. Step number 3, be mindful of your innermost feelings.
Yeah. Because sometimes we have things going on inside our head where you say you're trying to rebuild trust, but inwardly you still got that anger, that resentment on the inside. So you got to be mindful. Okay, this is how I'm feeling. What do you do when you have those feelings? You don't go take it out on them and you don't hold it inside. For some people, journaling may be a healthy outlet. This is how I'm feeling today. This is what triggered me today. Whatever you need to do. Because everybody responds differently. I'm learning to journal. For some of you listening, you might be like, well, I don't like to write. We got record on our cell phone. Record those
Right. That's true.
down. So
Right.
you can kind of see what caused that feeling and how did you deal with it. So you have something to refer back to in the future.
Right. So step number 4 is be honest. In other words, don't tell the other person what you think they want to hear,
Absolutely.
but you tell them how you honestly and how you really feel.
Because what happens sometimes, we're not completely honest about how we feel, and we keep sweeping things under the rug. Sweeping things under the rug. For anybody, you know how we tell everyone, you clean the house, sweep stuff out. You sweep it and you pick it up and throw it away. What happens if we take garbage and put it under the rug? Then you add some more under the rug.
Right.
And add some more. How long do you think that rug is going to be able to hide what's going on underneath it?
Right.
It's going to start to build up and build up and build up, to eventually it explodes.
Yeah, and then also when you have yellow flags and red flags, those are things that, okay, look like they're leading up to the situation that caused the issue. Don't ignore them. Address them immediately. Because like she said, if you keep sweeping it on the rug or just ignoring them, and then all of a sudden it's going to explode into one big argument.
And here's a hint for, I've had several men ask us this, why do women fuss about something as simple as a toilet seat or something as simple as take out the trash? I can pretty much guarantee you it had nothing to do with taking out the trash.
Right.
It's a symptom of something from before. There's been a buildup, something that's been swept under the rug or ignored for so long. Something little happens and it just triggers an explosion from holding all those emotions on the inside. So it's best to set some side a time. And for those of you, you can connect with us. We have a conflict resolution sheet that we can provide for you. We'll give you there's a number to text to get the conflict resolution sheet.
Yes.
And if you like to do that.
Right.
And then the
Step number 5
is what?
Be consistent.
Yes. Nothing's going to speak louder to your spouse than changed behavior. Because you could say, I'm sorry to you're blue in the face, but if you're doing the same thing over and over and over, your sorry means nothing. I'd rather you show me more so than you can tell me. If you're intentional, hey, sweetheart, I realize doing this hurt your feelings or makes you feel some type of way. I like to see you being intentional about doing things. Something as simple as, not forgetting my order. Something to eat. I mean, but we're laughing, but that.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Little things that husbands forget. If you start to be intentional about remembering the little things or changing your behavior to reflect what you said,
right,
that goes a long way.
Right. So turn to page 40 and take the Rebuilding Trust quiz. And there's 10 questions. Taking this quiz will open up some eyes and find some things that you thought that you had taken care of in the Rebuilding Trust. Find out, you got some work to do.
Yeah, because one of the things we realize that, everyone, when you get married, we want your marriage to win. You have a lot of couples out there like you, like us, who struggle to keep their vows at some point in time. But one of the good things is that you guys are not suffering in silence. You reached out to get help. You got a copy you signed up for this masterclass, and you're doing the necessary work to help your marriage to be able to win. And some of the times you'll find out somebody's blowing up publicly because they've been struggling privately.
That's
and
right.
Didn't get the help they need. So we truly, truly hope that this class has been a blessing to you. That talking about the communication, talking about finances, talking about sex, talking about forgiveness and rebuilding trust, that it has shed some light or given you a different mindset shift. So when you're going back to your relationship, you start to remember some of these tools and strategies that you can implement right away. Just be mindful that marriage isn't an easy thing, but it's fulfilling when you get it right. And we just want to make sure that we're helping you guys to find fulfillment.
And you've taken the necessary steps because you invested into this course. Now, just remember that you have to be the change that you want to see in your relationships. So you take action.